Margaret Maggie Thornton, an 82-year-old retired librarian, lived alone in a Victorian-era house on Elm Street in Salem, Oregon that she had owned for 37 years. Following the death of her husband Harold in 2019, Maggie had maintained her independence despite developing mild arthritis and occasional balance issues that made certain daily activities challenging. Maggie's modest two-story home reflected a lifetime of careful financial management and her career-long love of books. The house contained thousands of volumes, antique furniture inherited from her parents, and a meticulously maintained garden that had won neighborhood beautification awards multiple times during the 1990s and early 2000s. Her financial situation was stable due to Harold's federal employee pension, her own retirement savings from 32 years with the Salem Public Library system, and Social Security benefits. Bank records later reviewed by investigators showed that Maggie's monthly income totaled approximately $4,200, with modest living expenses that allowed her to save roughly $1,500 per month. Maggie had accumulated savings of $387,000 across multiple accounts at First National Bank of Oregon, plus additional investments in certificates of deposit and municipal bonds worth approximately $125,000. Her financial advisor, Robert Kim, had worked with the Thorntons for over 15 years and described Maggie as extremely prudent with money and suspicious of unnecessary expenditures. Maggie's only surviving relatives were her nephew, David Thornton, who lived in Seattle and visited twice per year, and her great-niece, Jennifer Walsh, who resided in Portland and maintained regular phone contact, but visited infrequently due to work obligations and family responsibilities. In March 2023, Maggie experienced a fall in her bathroom that resulted in a fractured wrist and mild concussion. Following a 3-day hospital stay at Salem Hospital, her physician, Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, recommended that Maggie consider hiring part-time assistants to help with household tasks, meal preparation, and transportation to medical appointments. Maggie initially resisted the suggestion, expressing concerns about the cost of care services and her desire to maintain privacy in her home. However, after discussions with David and Jennifer, she agreed to explore options for minimal assistance that would allow her to continue living independently. Through a referral from Salem Hospital's Discharge Planning Department, Maggie contacted Caring Hearts Home Services, a locally owned agency that provided non-medical assistance to elderly clients. The agency's owner, Linda Patterson, conducted an initial assessment and recommended 12 hours per week of companionship and light household assistance. On April 18, 2023, Caring Hearts assigned 34-year-old Angela Brooks to provide services for Maggie. Brooks had been employed with the agency for 8 months and presented credentials showing completion of basic caregiver training and background checks required for working with elderly clients. Angela's employment history, according to records later obtained by investigators, included previous positions with 2 other home care agencies in Oregon and Washington. Her references from these employers were generally positive, though one supervisor noted that Angela had occasionally been unreliable about reporting work hours accurately. Angela lived in a rented duplex in West Salem with her boyfriend Marcus Rivera and her 8-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. Financial records showed that Angela earned approximately $14.50 per hour from Caring Hearts, providing her with gross monthly income of roughly $2,900 when working full-time across multiple clients. However, Angela faced significant personal financial pressures that were unknown to either her employer or her clients. She owed approximately $18,000 in credit card debt accumulated over the previous 3 years, had fallen behind on child support payments to her daughter's father, and was struggling to cover rent and basic living expenses. Additionally, Angela's boyfriend Marcus had been unemployed for several months, following his termination from a construction job due to drug testing violations. His lack of income had increased financial pressure on Angela to cover their shared expenses while supporting her daughter. The initial arrangement between Maggie and Angela appeared successful to outside observers. Angela arrived promptly for her scheduled visits 3 times per week, assisted with grocery shopping and light cleaning, and provided companionship that helped reduce Maggie's social isolation following her husband's death. Maggie expressed satisfaction with Angela's services during phone conversations with her nephew David and great-niece Jennifer. She mentioned that Angela was helpful, respectful, and had a pleasant personality that made their time together enjoyable. Maggie particularly appreciated Angela's willingness to discuss books and her interest in hearing stories about Maggie's career at the library. However, Angela's true character began emerging within weeks of beginning her employment with Maggie. She observed that Maggie lived alone, rarely received visitors, and maintained all her financial accounts and important documents in a home office that was easily accessible during Angela's visits. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By June 2023, Angela had gained Maggie's trust sufficiently to learn details about her financial situation. During conversations about budgeting for care services, Maggie mentioned her savings accounts and expressed confidence that she could afford assistance for many years without depleting her resources. Angela also observed Maggie's daily routines, including her practice of leaving her purse and important documents on the kitchen counter while she rested in the afternoons. Maggie's trusting nature and mild cognitive changes related to aging made her vulnerable to manipulation by someone she had come to view as a trusted friend and helper. The theft began gradually in late June 2023, when Angela started taking small amounts of cash from Maggie's purse during her visits. Initially, she removed only $10 or $20 at a time, amounts that Maggie was unlikely to notice immediately given her limited spending and infrequent cash handling. When these initial thefts went undetected, Angela became bolder in her approach. She began studying Maggie's financial documents when left alone in the house, learning account numbers, bank locations, and the patterns of Maggie's spending and saving habits. In July 2023, Angela discovered that Maggie kept a list of account passwords and PIN numbers in a notebook stored in her home office desk. This discovery provided Angela with the information needed to access Maggie's accounts electronically, without requiring physical visits to bank locations. Angela's systematic theft escalated significantly in August 2023. Using Maggie's account information, she began making online transfers to accounts she had established using false identification documents. Her method involved creating small business checking accounts at different banks under names similar to legitimate local service providers. The fraudulent accounts were designed to appear related to home maintenance, medical services, or other expenses that would seem reasonable for an elderly person living alone. Angela used variations of names like Salem Home Care Services and Thornton Property Maintenance to create believability if Maggie noticed the transactions. Between August 2023 and January 2024, Angela systematically stole approximately $147,000 from Maggie's various accounts. Her transfers were typically for amounts between $1,200 and $3,500, sized to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems, while accumulating substantial sums over time. Angela used the stolen money to pay off her credit card debts, cover rent and living expenses for her family, and purchase a used Honda Accord that she had been unable to afford on her legitimate income. She also gave Marcus several $1,000s to start a small landscaping business, though he used most of the money for personal expenses rather than business investments. Maggie remained unaware of the theft throughout this period because Angela had strategically targeted accounts that Maggie checked infrequently and had altered her mail delivery to intercept bank statements before Maggie could review them. Angela accomplished this by filing change of address forms that redirected Maggie's financial correspondence to a post office box she had rented under a false name. The scheme began unraveling in February 2024 when Maggie's financial advisor, Robert Kim, attempted to contact her about annual tax preparation and investment reviews. During their phone conversation, Maggie mentioned that she had been receiving fewer bank statements than usual and was concerned about potential mail delivery problems. Kim offered to help Maggie contact her banks to request duplicate statements and verify account balances. When Kim called First National Bank of Oregon on Maggie's behalf, he discovered that her primary savings account contained only $23,000, significantly less than the $180,000 that should have been present based on his records. The bank's customer service representative explained that numerous transfers had been made from the account over the previous 6 months. totaling over $157,000 in outgoing transactions to various business accounts. Kim immediately recognized that Maggie had not authorized these transfers and advised her to contact police immediately. Maggie was initially confused and upset by the news, finding it difficult to understand how such large amounts could have been stolen without her knowledge. However, she agreed to meet with Kim and bank officials to review transaction records and begin the process of reporting the theft to authorities. The meeting was scheduled for February 28, 2024, at First National Bank's main Salem branch. Kim planned to accompany Maggie to help her understand the evidence and provide support during what would inevitably be a traumatic revelation about the extent of her financial losses. However, Angela learned about the planned meeting when she overheard a phone conversation between Maggie and Kim during one of her regular visits. Realizing that the theft would soon be discovered and reported to police, Angela began planning methods to prevent Maggie from attending the meeting or cooperating with the investigation. Angela's research into methods of harming Maggie followed a similar pattern to her earlier financial crimes, involving careful online research and gradual escalation of risk-taking behavior. Browser history later recovered from her personal devices showed extensive searches for information about medications that could be dangerous for elderly people, particularly those with heart conditions or other health vulnerabilities. Angela's searches focused on substances that could cause symptoms that might appear to be natural medical emergencies in an 82-year-old woman. She researched digitalis toxicity, insulin overdoses, and various household chemicals that could be lethal if administered in sufficient quantities. Ultimately, Angela settled on using antifreeze, specifically ethylene glycol, which she could obtain easily, and administer through Maggie's food or beverages. Her research indicated that ethylene glycol poisoning could mimic stroke symptoms or heart failure, conditions that would not be unexpected in a woman of Maggie's age. On February 26, 2024, 2 days before the scheduled bank meeting, Angela arrived for her regular visit with Maggie carrying a container of orange juice that she claimed to have brought as a special treat. She prepared lunch for Maggie and served the juice as part of their meal together. Unknown to Maggie, Angela had added approximately 4 ounces of antifreeze to the orange juice, a quantity that would deliver a potentially fatal dose of ethylene glycol. The orange flavor was intended to mask the sweet taste of the antifreeze and make the poisoning less detectable. Maggie consumed the entire glass of juice during their lunch conversation, during which Angela maintained her usual friendly demeanor while internally calculating the timeline for the poison's effects to manifest. Based on her research, Angela expected Maggie to become ill within hours and potentially die within 24 to 48 hours. After leaving Maggie's house that afternoon, Angela returned home and waited for news of Maggie's illness or death. Her plan was to express shock and grief when contacted about Maggie's condition, positioning herself as a caring friend who had been concerned about Maggie's health in recent weeks. However, Angela's plan encountered an unexpected complication when Maggie's neighbor, Helen Rodriguez, decided to check on her that evening after noticing that Maggie's usual routine had been disrupted. Rodriguez found Maggie in her living room, conscious but disoriented and complaining of nausea and severe headaches. Rodriguez immediately called 911 and accompanied Maggie to Salem Hospital, where emergency room physicians initially diagnosed her condition as a possible stroke or cardiac event. However, Dr. Patricia Wong, the attending physician, noted that Maggie's symptoms included unusual features that suggested possible toxin exposure. Blood tests revealed elevated levels of substances consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning, leading Dr. Wong to immediately begin treatment with fomepizole, an antidote that could counteract the effects of antifreeze if administered promptly. Maggie's early treatment likely saved her life, though she remained hospitalized in serious condition for over a week. The discovery of ethylene glycol in Maggie's bloodstream prompted Salem Police Department to open a criminal investigation into attempted murder. Detective Sarah Mitchell was assigned to lead the investigation, with initial focus on identifying who had access to Maggie's food and beverages in the hours before her poisoning. Angela was among the first people interviewed due to her regular access to Maggie's home and her presence there on the day of the poisoning. During initial questioning, Angela expressed concern for Maggie's health and claimed to have no knowledge of how she might have been exposed to antifreeze. However, investigators became suspicious when Angela's account of her activities during the February 26th visit contained inconsistencies. She initially claimed to have brought only basic lunch items, but later acknowledged bringing orange juice when presented with a receipt from a grocery store, showing her purchase of juice and other items that same morning. The investigation expanded when Detective Mitchell learned about the scheduled bank meeting and the recently discovered financial theft. The timing of Maggie's poisoning occurring just 2 days before she was scheduled to review evidence of the stolen funds suggested that the attempted murder was connected to the financial crimes. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible true crime stories. Let us know in the comments what you think was Angela's biggest mistake in trying to cover up her theft. Financial forensic specialists were able to trace the fraudulent account transfers back to the bank accounts Angela had established using false identities. Surveillance footage from various bank locations showed Angela making deposits and withdrawals from these accounts, providing visual evidence linking her to the theft. Additional evidence emerged when investigators searched Angela's residence and discovered documents related to the fraudulent accounts, unused antifreeze containers, and computer records of her research into poisoning methods. Her browser history revealed the systematic nature of her planning for both the theft and the attempted murder. Angela was arrested on March 15, 2024, and charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, identity theft, and multiple counts of fraud related to the systematic theft of Maggie's savings. Her boyfriend Marcus was also arrested on charges of money laundering for his role in using funds that he knew or should have known were stolen. During interrogation, Angela initially maintained her innocence and claimed that she had been trying to help Maggie manage her finances rather than steal from her. However, when confronted with the extensive evidence of premeditation and the attempt to murder Maggie, she requested legal counsel and declined to provide further statements. The case attracted significant attention in Salem due to the vulnerability of the elderly victim and the betrayal of trust involved in Angela's crimes. Elder advocacy groups used the case to highlight the need for better background checks and supervision of caregivers working with vulnerable adults. Maggie survived the poisoning attempt, but required months of medical treatment to recover from the effects of ethylene glycol exposure. Her nephew David moved to Salem to provide support during her recovery and to help her restructure her living arrangements to prevent future victimization. The financial recovery process proved complex and lengthy. While some of the stolen funds were recovered from Angela's accounts, approximately $89,000 remained missing and was likely spent on personal expenses that could not be recovered. Maggie's insurance provided some coverage, but she faced significant financial losses that affected her ability to continue living independently. The trial of Angela Brooks began in September 2024, with prosecutors presenting evidence of systematic financial exploitation, followed by attempted murder to cover up the crimes. The prosecution argued that Angela had violated the trust placed in her by both her employer and her victim, while demonstrating complete disregard for Maggie's welfare. Expert witnesses testified about the effects of ethylene glycol poisoning and the likelihood that Maggie would have died without prompt medical intervention. Medical testimony established that the amount of antifreeze administered was sufficient to cause death in most people of Maggie's age and health status. Angela's defense attorney argued that she had not intended to kill Maggie and that the poisoning was meant only to make her too ill to attend the bank meeting. However, toxicology experts testified that the dose administered was far beyond what would be necessary to cause temporary illness and was consistent with intent to cause death. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Angela was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for attempted murder, plus additional consecutive sentences totaling 15 years for the financial crimes and elder abuse charges. Marcus Rivera pleaded guilty to money laundering charges and received a sentence of 4 years in state prison. He was also ordered to pay restitution for his portion of the stolen funds, though his ability to make payments was limited by his lack of legitimate income or assets. Maggie Thornton never fully recovered from the psychological trauma of learning that someone she trusted had systematically stolen from her and then attempted to kill her. She moved to an assisted living facility in Salem, where she could receive appropriate care while maintaining some independence. The case prompted Oregon state legislators to review regulations governing home care services and background check requirements for caregivers working with vulnerable adults. New legislation was introduced requiring enhanced training and more frequent supervision of workers in private homes. Caring Hearts Home Services, Angela's former employer, faced civil lawsuits from Maggie and her family, alleging inadequate supervision and background screening. The company eventually settled the claims for an undisclosed amount while implementing additional safety protocols. Angela Brooks is currently serving her sentence at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville, Oregon. She has maintained her innocence regarding the attempted murder charge while acknowledging her involvement in the financial theft, though she minimizes the extent of her crimes. The Salem Police Department used the Brooks case to develop training materials for investigating financial crimes against elderly victims, emphasizing the importance of recognizing when financial exploitation may escalate to physical violence. Dr. Patricia Wong, the physician who recognized the signs of ethylene glycol poisoning, has become an advocate for increased awareness among medical professionals about the symptoms of intentional poisoning in elderly patients. Her quick diagnosis and treatment likely saved Maggie's life and provided crucial evidence for the criminal prosecution. Maggie's story has been used by elder protection advocates to educate families about the warning signs of financial exploitation and the importance of maintaining oversight of caregiving arrangements. Her case demonstrates how quickly trusted relationships can be exploited by individuals with criminal intent. The financial recovery process continued through civil litigation and asset forfeiture proceedings, with efforts to recover additional stolen funds from various accounts and purchases made by Angela and Marcus. However, the majority of Maggie's losses were permanent, representing the life savings she had accumulated through decades of careful financial management. Community organizations in Salem established a fund to assist elderly victims of financial crimes. Inspired by Maggie's case and recognizing that many elderly people lack the resources to recover from such devastating losses, the fund provides emergency assistance and legal support for similar victims. The case remains a stark reminder of the vulnerability of elderly people living alone and the potential for trusted caregivers to exploit their positions of access and authority for criminal purposes. It highlights the need for continuous vigilance and protective measures to safeguard vulnerable adults from those who would take advantage of their trust and dependence.